Introducing the DRF Cash Grab app, the super easy, free-to-play sports predictor game from a name you know and trust. The Daily Racing Form. Use your sports knowledge to predict the winners, and you could score thousands of dollars in cash prizes. Pro football, college football, pro basketball, college basketball, hockey, soccer, boxing, baseball, and more. Compete against others for a spot on the monthly leaderboard. Download the DRF Cash Grab app and play today.
Hey everyone, David Aragona and Craig Milkowski are taking a look at one of two sprint stakes for 3-year-olds on Saturday at Keeneland. This is race 6, the Perryville Stakes, going 7 furlongs for the 3-year-old males. And Craig, a somewhat surprising entrant in this race, as I had seen Gunite mentioned as a probable for either the Breeders' Cup Sprint or Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile, but Steve Asmussen is running in this easier spot in ungraded stakes against some lesser 3-year-olds, but he has not precluded Gunite running back in the Breeders' Cup on 2 weeks rest. I guess we'll see how he clears this hurdle on Saturday, but unsurprisingly, as we throw up the field for this race, he's listed as the 6-5 morning line favorite.
Yeah, I was surprised to see him as well, but I would imagine that they just think this is an easier spot. I don't think the sprint this year is going to come up particularly tough, but it's a good spot for him. I hope he does run back in 2 weeks, but he certainly looks like the strongest of this field.
Yeah, he's just been in great form over the summer, got good at Saratoga, carried that form through to the fall at Churchill Downs. We'll talk about him a little bit more in just a bit, but this field does not lack for quality despite being an ungraded stakes race, Craig. Artorias ran the Travers last time. He's cutting back in distance for Chad Brown, and some horses coming out of that Gallant Bob Stakes at Parks, Of a Revolution, and Provocateur. There are some nice runners in here. Let's take a look at the Time Form US pace projector to see how they could stack up on the front end. And not a fast pace predicted, Craig, but I wouldn't be surprised if this is a competitive pace towards the lead, because there are a few that want to be forwardly placed in here.
Right. We have 3 of them bunched up on the pace projector. I think Provocateur, who's drawn to the inside, almost has to go. He was drawn inside last time at Parks, kind of read it off the pace, didn't work out very well for him. Pinehurst, the 4-horse shown in second, is a bit of a question mark. He's only run once in this country. Did set the pace in that Grade 2 Amsterdam, but it was a slowish pace in that race, a race Gunite was in. And I think Gunite holds all the high cards in here because he draws a perfect outside post, has good tactical speed, and can kind of see what's going on before his jockey makes a decision.
Let's dive into some of these main contenders and begin with that morning line favorite, the number 8 Gunite. And let's take a look at his one loss in his last 4 starts, because it was arguably the best race that he's run in his career when he was a strong second in the Grade 1 Alan Jerkins 2 back behind Jack Christopher, who's widely regarded to be the best 3-year-old sprinter out there. And Gunite makes Jack Christopher work for this victory, Craig, because he takes a good run at him in the stretch. And I think it just displays what excellent form this horse is in right now.
It wasn't easy for sure for Jack Christopher, and I think you have it right in that he ran his best Time Form US speed figure that day, a 125. His next start when he came back at Churchill to win that listed stakes, he won easily with a 123 against a slightly easier field, though the tough Conacher was in there. So he is in raging form, and just for me, he's going to be very tough to beat.
Yeah, he's never been out of the exacta at this 7 furlong distance. He's won 3 of his last 4 races going the 7, or I should say 2 of his last 3 races going the 7 furlong distance. He's drawn perfectly on the outside. He can be wide of that other speed if they want to go to the inside. Just seems like this is really set up well for Gunite on Saturday at Keeneland. But let's take a look at the horse that some might consider to be his main rival. That's the number 3 Artorias. And we'll check out his victory 2 back when he won the Keeneland Stakes at Saratoga. This set him up to try the Travers next time out and didn't fare quite so well in that race. But this Keeneland victory was pretty impressive, Craig, because there were some nice horses in behind, and he draws off with authority through the stretch.
He did, and like you said, he tried the Travers next time out. That running line might look a little disappointing, but if you go back to this race at Saratoga where he just blitzed the field, leaving behind Triple Crown veteran Creative Minister for 1, he looked pretty good. My one concern for him is the distance, because he's only run this short in his debut. When he tried 6 furlongs, it proved a little too short for him. He was immediately moved out to a mile, so it seems like he's the kind who might need some pace to get a good setup.
I mean, I get the thinking, but the turn back from a pedigree standpoint, because his damn Paula Silver Lining was a champion sprinter, multiple Grade 1 winner at 6 and 7 furlongs. So I get thinking that he might be able to turn back based on that pedigree. But all of the physical notes I've heard about this horse suggest that he wants to run all day. So kind of odd they're turning back to 7 furlongs from that perspective. And we'll take a look at a formulator fact for trainer Chad Brown with regard to Artorias, and just not something that Chad does particularly well. It's hard to find really negative stats for the Chad Brown barn because he does so many things well, but turning back on the dirt in stakes races just hasn't had a whole lot of success.
No, that's not really surprising. If you were going, I wouldn't even call it a weakness, but most people assume he's better on turf than dirt and better going long than sprint. So we get a combination of both here.
Let's check out one of the horses that could challenge Gunite for the early lead in this Perryville. That's the number 2 Provocateur, and we'll take a look at his last victory, 2-back in the Jersey Shore Stakes at Monmouth. And Craig, this horse slipped through along the inside on the far turn, took over, and really never let anybody else get close to him in the stretch. This was an impressive victory, but he came back as the favorite next time in the Gallant Bob and did not run nearly as well.
No, I like this race from him, and we did that Gallant Bob, I think, in our podcast, and also a race preview, if memory serves me right, which is never a sure thing. But I'm pretty sure neither one of us particularly liked him in this spot, given his inside draw. It was a huge field of 13 that day, and it just seemed like he got lost in the shuffle in the beginning, something that I don't think is going to happen here. So I'm personally willing to put a line through that race.
Yeah, I think one of the big questions for Provocateur could be the 7 furlongs. He's a horse that's done his best work going a little bit shorter than that. You could forgive his last try at 7 furlongs, I suppose, because he did face Jack Christopher that day, but he could face some speed to the outside. However, he's a big price on the morning line, so I wouldn't want to talk anybody off him if they have a positive opinion on this horse. The number 7 of a Revolution was in the Gallant Bob, the same race that Provocateur comes out of. Let's take a look at the stretch run of that race, because Of a Revolution actually ran quite well in here. Craig, you might remember I had liked this horse in the Gallant Bob off of his trip in the Jersey Shore, where I thought he didn't really get the best setup, had some traffic trouble. I thought he got a much better trip on this day from Flavien Prat, just couldn't quite catch the winner Scaramouche.
Yeah, he ran fine on this day. My one issue with him is when we see the graphic for him, he just hasn't run particularly fast compared to a lot of horses in here. I suspect he's going to take money. I think he's maybe third choice on the morning line. And he's one that just seems like an underlay. I wouldn't be shocked if he won this race, but I actually thought he got a decent trip last time and really didn't have an excuse not to beat Scaramouche.
Yeah, and another point I want to make, even though that Gallant Bob was a Grade 2 event and this is a listed stakes race, I'm not sure it's really much of a drop in class at all for Of a Revolution, because while that was a big field in the Gallant Bob, you did not have the star power of horses like Gunite or even Artorias. So this might be a tougher spot for Of a Revolution, as he does have to run a faster speed figure, as Craig noted. Another horse that I do want to discuss is the number 6 B, because he's got a big race over this racetrack at a very similar distance, the about 7 furlongs on that Beard course. Let's take a look at the last time he ran at Keeneland, when he broke his maiden, going all the way back to April of this year. Now, like I said, Craig, this was just a maiden field, but this horse could not have been more impressive on this day.
He was very impressive. And I think the question with him is does he really want to sprint more than route? Because they keep putting him into route races, ambitiously, I should say. I mean, you can understand wanting to take a shot in a race like the Pennsylvania Derby, but all his best races have come at shorter distances, particularly the 7 furlong distance. So it's just a matter of if you think he's really a sprinter and how he's going to fare in here. I personally think he is. I'm not going to look at that Pennsylvania Derby speed figure too much. That just has the ultimate look of a suck-up kind of speed figure to me. But I think the truth is somewhere in between that 121 and those lower 100 type figures that we're seeing. I think he's more like the 112, and with some progression, he could run in the upper teens and maybe not be quite as Gunite, but I think he could be a factor in here.
I agree, Craig. His form is a little bit hard to parse, but he does have that 118 final time number that he earned when he won that maiden race. That knocked down a little bit because he set a slow pace that day. But I think that form would hold up pretty well here. And while he did run a faster speed figure in that Pennsylvania Derby last time, and I agree with your skepticism about that number, he wasn't really ridden to be competitive that day. It just felt, like you said, like he was clunking along for a piece, not really, carried a little bit by the horses that finished ahead of him that are superior. So not really sure what to do with him from that perspective, but I do feel like he's got the talent in there to potentially challenge for a higher placing. So we'll see what we get from B Doc. One more horse that I do want to talk about is the number 1, Hoist the Gold. He's one of the more experienced runners in this field, making the 14th start of his career on Saturday at Keeneland. Been a little bit of time since he's won a race, but I thought he's run pretty well in each of his last 2 starts, Greg, beaten by the Progressive Elite Power 2-back. And then last time out, finishing ahead of a horse, Tejano Twist, who came back with a big win at Keeneland last week.
Yeah, the company lines look better than the speed figures, and it's kind of a quandary for me. We know Elite Power came back to win the Vosburg and did it pretty easily, but that wasn't a very strong edition of the Vosburg. And Tejano Twist did explode to win that allowance race at Keeneland last time in fast time as well. So this one I'm a little bit torn on. I think he could be a factor, but he's going to have to improve. And of all the horses in here, as one that's the most heavily raced, he'd be the one I'd least expect that improvement from.
Well, Craig, let's throw up our picks for this race, and we're both going in a pretty logical direction. We each have the number 8 Gun Knight on top, the expected heavy favorite in this race. From a class perspective, speed figures perspective, he's just a standout in here, and he's likely to get the right kind of trip for him. So he's a hard horse to go against in this race.
He is. He's not a horse I'd be looking to bet win money on in this spot. He's obviously going to be odds on and probably pretty low odds on. But I may try to play some verticals with a couple of the horses we talked underneath. Provocateur, the 2 horse, and B Doc, the 6, who I've listed 4th, but I think he'll offer much better value than the 3 horse.
Yeah, I put B-Doc second, that number 6 horse. Briefly considered putting him on top, flipping my top 2, but Gun Knight just seems to have such an advantage over this field, so primarily I'd be interested in playing exactas with B-Doc underneath. That's a look at the Perryville Stakes on Saturday at Keeneland. Good luck if you're playing the races this weekend.